I think I lost my place. Gave Governor Francis Wyatt possession of an African manservant named Brass, who was temporarily in the custody of Captain Samuel Bass. We know that from court testimony that the captain of the Portugal had allowed Bass to use the man's labor in payment for some clothing. In 1624 and 25, we have Edward, an African, residing on the mainland directly behind Jamestown Island. He was part of a household headed by Richard Kingsmill, guardian of the Reverend Richard Buck's children. After the Buck orphans were grown, one of them may have acquired Edward, or may not. In Warrasqueak, we know 4 Africans were living in the Bennett Plantation in February 1624, Anthony, Peter, Francis, and Margaret. However, by early 25, only 2 Africans were there, Antonio and Mary, and we know the dates of the ships they came on. Edward Bennett, an important merchant, was a Puritan and a member of the Virginia Company. We don't really know for sure, but his Puritan beliefs may have influenced his willingness to treat his African servants like everyone else. Antonio and his wife Mary were freed by the 1640s. We know that for a fact because they were living on the eastern shore as free people, and they took the surname Johnson. The Johnsons eventually moved to Pumpatee Creek and lived there until 1665, when they moved to Somerset County, Maryland, and commenced leasing 300 acres on Wycomico Creek. Anthony's death, after he died in 1670, Mary renegotiated their lease. And remember this business about this lease and where they were living, because I have something at the very end for you on that. In 1625, there were 7 Africans, 4 men, 2 women, and a young child living at Flowerdew Hundred, which had been renamed Piercy's Hundred. But no Africans were part of the household at Jamestown in 1624-25. Abraham Piercy died in January 1628, and his widow Frances quickly remarried. She took as her husband Samuel Matthews I of Matthews Manor or Denby Plantation, but by 1633 she was dead. Her stepdaughter Mary, the former Mary Piercy, claimed that Matthews, whose plantation we know had a large number of skillful African workers, had depleted her late father's estate. So maybe some of the people who had been in Flowerdew and the Piercy plantation went there. In 1649, a visitor to the Matthews plantation claimed that he had 40 black servants and, quote, brings them up in the trades. So they were learning things that were useful there. Virginia planters appreciated the value of African workers and sought to increase the number of them in the colony. And in 1628, the Fortune, a ship captured a Spanish slave ship that had left Angola with 100 Africans who were traded for tobacco when Captain Arthur Guy reached Virginia. By 1635, Virginia settlers began importing Africans as headrights. They were using them to claim land. They could, for every person whose transportation you paid to the colony, you could get 50 acres of land. That went on for quite a while. The earliest I could find in the records, there were several instances in 1635, and they're sporadic after that. Finally, by April 1699, the General Assembly said no, and we're not going to allow that anymore. And that's very probably because the slave trade had really begun opening up in earnest at that time. There were several Royal African Company agents who owned property in Jamestown, urban Jamestown, and actually lived there. John Page, Colonel Nathaniel Bacon, a cousin of the rebel that's so well known, John Soane, a mariner, William Sherwood, and William Armiger. All of these men had land on the waterfront. And so you can see easily how they could have been representatives of the Royal African Company, and it's not hard to imagine ships docking there, Africans being offloaded and sold to buyers. And this is really a good image of slavery, such a human tragedy. By 1705, we have the slave code, and by that time, really, over 16,000 Africans or their descendants were living in Virginia, and authorities were worried about the prospect of a rebellion. But in 1705, the laws governing the punishment and ownership of slaves was summarized in the legal code. And all slaves in Virginia from that point on were classified as real estate that could be bought, sold, or transferred by means of request. And they could be sold also or taken to satisfy personal debt. These laws applied to all who had not been Christians in their native country, with the exception of Turks and Moors. Africans who brought to the country from the Guinea coasters likely came from different tribes and in a diverse cultural background. And in time, a unique African-American cultural tradition developed, and today we can learn a great deal from this great diversity that we enjoy in music, dance, folklore, religion, craft, and artistry. And without a doubt, reminders of the African motherland lingered among the men, women, and children forcibly uprooted and brought here. And those recollections would have been passed along to future generations. In fact, in 1677, John Johnson, the grandson of Anthony and Mary Johnson of Watersweek in Northampton County, the ones that moved up to Maryland, he called his plantation Angola. See, these roots run deep, and we have to hang on to this. We had Dr. Henry Louis Gates, who so aptly put it, termed that the largest forced migration in human history gave rise to an American tragedy that still haunts us today. And in closing, I want to mention that this research was conducted in collaboration with the Jamestown Yorktown Foundation, and is going to be used in forming their new gallery content. And it's also helping to enrich what we know about Angelo's story and provides a better understanding of what the Africans arrived here in 1619 had gone through.